Attention, please. We have no gavel today. The staff has misplaced the gavel, so we will have to count on us all sort of paying attention a little bit more. First of all, welcome. This is the board meeting for the Northeast Ohio Sustainable Communities Consortium. Today's Tuesday, September 24th. We are at the Akron Urban League. To do introductions, I guess I can start. Grace Galucci. I am the chair of NEOSCC as well as the executive director for NOACA.
Hunter Morrison, the executive director of NEOSCC.
Bob Now, Stark Regional Planning.
John Getchie, Skate Regional Council.
Bill Davignon, City of Youngstown.
David Beach from the Cleveland Museum of Natural History.
Gene Nixon, Summit County Public Health.
Anna Diacenas, Mahoning County Commissioner.
Jason Sagady, Director of AMAX.
Joe Hadley, Executive Director of NEFCO.
Rachel McCartney with the Eastgate Regional Council of Governments.
Antoine Bowie, NEOSCC.
And on the phone, could you introduce yourselves, please?
Hi, this is Becky. I'm first with the Fund for Economic Research.
Hi, this is Rick Horton.
Great. Thank you, and again, welcome. The first item under public comment, we have a presentation from LEADCO.
How have your efforts been received by the traditional power utilities?
What kind of cost differential was there between putting a turbine out in the lake as opposed to putting it on land? Is it more cost effective to do that? Or?
Are there, do you have critics against this project? And if so, what's their argument?
Yeah, that's terrific, and it does then help to explain why the LEADCO presentation is very apropos for what we're doing here. Now, you're going to send something around that if folks want. Okay, moving to action items. The first item we have here is approval of the meeting minutes, August 27, 2013. Do I have a motion? So I have a motion from Mike Lyons to approve. Do I have a second?
I second.
Mike Challenger seconds. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Next item is approval of the fiscal year 2012 audit. Is there any discussion or presentation from staff or the auditors or the finance committee on the matter? Certainly. So do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Do I have a second? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Next, we have items for discussion, and the first is objectives for October, Phase 3. Hunter Morrison, please.
Yes, you have up on the board and also in your packet on the green sheet the objectives. Again, the principal activity this month is regards the regional scenario planning and fiscal impact. On the front of the green sheet are the list of the vision sessions out in the communities. We're going out to 9 vision sessions throughout Northeast Ohio, 2 in Cuyahoga, and the rest are in the other participating counties. We also have caucus sessions, which Patty Chobe will talk a little bit about, October 15th and November 1st, and we will be getting those lists out. The final AI report will be up on the web page. We're tweaking a few maps, but we're basically done with that. The product development, the dashboard, toolkit, policies, and pilots, again, they're going to be finalized, and one of the things we've been waiting for is for work from the framework planning, the scenario planning work, so that particularly as it relates to the dashboard and the policy recommendations, they're closely allied and as much as possible incorporated within the final document seamlessly. Again, we're communications engagements involved with the visioning and the caucus sessions. We have a dashboard working group coming forward, engagement, and then the board meeting October 22nd. So it's going to be a very full month, particularly for those of us who are going to be on the road. And Jeff has been managing the arrangements, our staff, about the vision sessions, public meetings across Northeast Ohio, and then Cobalt and City Architecture are taking responsibility for the caucuses, and again, Patty will be talking about that. Anything you want to add, Jeff? Okay.
Any questions or comments? Rachel?
The caucuses, you said Patty's going to talk about those further later on? Is that correct, or?
Yes. Yeah, we'll have a discussion about that.
Then I don't.
Anything further? Okay, then moving on to the next item for discussion, the draft proposed vision. And Sasaki will take this presentation, and I believe they are on the phone. Correct? Yeah, I think that was a lot of information for us to digest, Chris, so I think it would be best to have us reflect for a moment and go ahead and ask questions and make comments on this part of the presentation, then we can go into engagement next.
That sounds great.
So I will open it up to the board members. Any questions or comments? If you want to take a few seconds. Yeah.
I have a comment. I just wanted to express some of my disappointment that there's not anything about education, and especially nothing about health, as this vision continues to develop. I really think of the vibrant Neo vision that Suzaki is working on as kind of the capstone of the efforts that we've undertaken over the last couple of years. And I'm disappointed that a vibrant region doesn't seem to have a place in it for vibrant people, or in this particular vision as it relates to health or education indicators. And this also seems somewhat inconsistent with the work that at least I've had the opportunity to be involved with the Issues and Trends platform, the work stream work, and even the data subgroup that's meeting on Friday is continuing to talk about incorporating certainly education and health in this. I get it. I understand that you can't have everything. You can't focus on everything, or else you end up focusing on nothing. And given where the funding comes from for this particular project and the federal agencies that are involved, I'm not entirely surprised. I just am surprised that it's completely left out and there's not a way to perhaps even include one thing associated with health or education.
David?
And actually, those two issues are embedded in a lot of these positive things that we're talking about. So if you change land use patterns, have more walkable communities, you'll have positive health impacts. If you help to redevelop our cities, you have positive education impacts. So you could talk about how these things will lead to those. But I think what they've done is really kind of look at isolated issues that can be affected by land use change. So it is kind of narrowed to that. Although I think we could draw out some positive stories about education.
I just think, when I think about Northeast Ohio, and I think back to one of the first maps that Suzaki presented that showed like the abandonment and the city of Cleveland completely empty, and that's really a story about people and movement. And so making sure that we have that in there, we can build all the bike lanes we want, and that's fantastic. But if you don't have people that want to move from place to place, then you have a real problem. So if there's a way that can be better incorporated, even if it's mentions or narrative, I think that would strengthen the vision.
Chris, do you have a response or comment to that, please?
Chris, a couple quick comments. I realized, regarding the maps, I realized that they're labeled draft initial, but I would encourage you to put some kind of a statement on the map that those are indicating conceptual elements so that the typical map reader doesn't try to locate those elements as to where they happen to live. The other comment I would make is that on the, there was a lot of information, as our chair noted, and I would encourage the use of a lot of graphics to communicate rather than more words. I think the public will respond better to that.
David?
To follow up on that point about the need for graphic communication, the map you showed shows the current status of Northeast Ohio with different kinds of development zones delineated. Will you also have a map and pictures that show what the future vision, the positive vision, could look like in the future?
Yeah, it's a good question.
Just a couple general comments. I mean, I think we're definitely at kind of a turning point in the effort now because we spent a pretty long time gathering public input at the 2 and 3rd coming up set of workshops. And I think Sasaki, with a lot of detail, presented the vision that it's kind of started to come up with. But I think for the future, we really should spend a lot of our time and resources for the remainder of the project, and if it continues into the future on, I think, taking what we got from the public, taking some of Sasaki's recommendations and transitioning into where, you know, we take on more of an organizational responsibility of figuring out what a lot of this means. And so I when I look at the recommendations, I look at those as Sasaki's recommendation back to us as the board, and then we should start to discuss these things, talk about priorities. Like Emily had mentioned, we get more of a health component. You know, that a lot of that I think is the responsibility of the board to talk about all that. So I think, you know, one thing I'd like to see, and I think the recommendations started to get at that, is especially if there's going to be a version 2.0 of NEOSCC, which specific initiatives or recommendations do we really want to focus on, and what is our role as an organization? I think that's going to come out in the discussion on the future in a couple minutes. But I mean, my personal opinion is I think our niche is that we can be a catalyst for, you know, making change on sustainability in a framework of kind of think regionally and act locally. And there might be times to act regionally too, but I think, you know, this is really where we have to start to internalize and take on some of what we've heard, and then figure out collectively as a board what it means to us.
Anyone else?
I just want to make a couple comments about the maps. I think the scale of the map and the legend on the map, it needs to either focus on less or be bigger. I want to know, I love the map, the colors are great and everything, but what am I looking at? And then you have to look at the legend. I just think it's too small for the individual who's getting brainstormed with all this new knowledge, okay? So what is the map about? That's my first focus. Then I'll look at the map. Not, here's the map, here's what it's about. So I think that kind of needs to find a larger balance for the end user, the public, Joe Public. The other thing that I wanted to mention was in these presentations when the board meets, if we could have a printout of Sasaki's PowerPoint that we'd be reviewing and discussing, I think it would be just more advantageous for maybe some ideas, wording, theory, whatever may pop out to us at the table here. So if we could just, next time we review a draft plan, have that printed out while he's reviewing with us the goals and plans.
That's a great idea. I see Hunter making a note of that.
Thank you.
In reference to your comment about the maps, as well as other comments I think that Joe Hadley made, it seems that we have to keep in mind that there are two audiences that this is intended for, And one are the professionals like ourselves or those who have been involved continuously over the 3-year time period who understand what this all means. And then there are those that we want to buy in to the vision, but perhaps are not planners, are not experts, and need to understand in a very simple way what this means. And so we have to think about translating some of that data and some of that information, and several of the board members have made comments to that effect, either simplifying maps. You know, one of the things as you were going through this presentation, I kept thinking, okay, 10 recommendations, and I kept thinking, can I remember what the first 3 are? How about the second 3? How about the third 3? I'd like to see them all on one page. So just thinking about ways to continually reinforce, simplify, translate the data, and maybe, I don't know if you're planning to do this, Chris, but some kind of an executive summary that's very, very simple, both for the board, so we can explain it to our own organizations or our own constituents, as well as perhaps an opener for the document itself. So think about that. As we think about trying to wrap this up, because we're in the end of September now, and we've got a couple of more months, really, to have this document done, so I think we're making tremendous progress. I'm glad to see that some of the recommendations, I think, are a nice balance between a bold statement as well as a realistic, or I think the word you used was not overreaching, and I think that is important. I think it's important for us to remember as board members, though, that NEOSCC itself, as a board or as an organization, isn't going to be able to implement these recommendations generally. The recommendations are implemented by the organizations that we represent, by the counties, by the municipalities, by the MPOs. And we have to ensure that as NEOSCC moves forward with its next iteration, that it acts as a facilitator to moving that vision forward, but not overstepping its bounds in terms of implementation, mostly because it doesn't have the authority to do that, and it's really the local level, and we've been promising that over and over and over again to folks that the local levels are the implementers. That being said, I want to make sure, and I know this was a lot of material, so Chris, it would be great if you could send us the file, and at least we can pass that out to board members after this meeting so they can take a look at it. But it's going to be really important as we digest this material that there is a consensus amongst this board that this is obviously the direction that we want to go in, as well as we start to get real specific on what the document's going to say, that there is support for it, so we can go back to our organizations and request support from them. Anything else?
We do have a copy of it too, Grace, so we can send it out.
Terrific. Okay. Chris, any closing comments?
No, I think it's really good feedback. I'm excited that we're at this stage. I just look forward to the next couple months as we continue to refine this.
And I think one more thing. I heard a lot of folks, particularly I think in Jason's comments, wanting to spend more time on the detailed level of information. Maybe we need to set up either a webinar or another meeting or something of this group just to dive into some more, or to perhaps brainstorm about some of these ideas, these concepts, the recommendations that you put out there, so we can give you more feedback early enough, Chris, that it can be easily applied.
That makes sense.
Okay, great. Then moving along to the next discussion item, we have phase 3 engagement, and I believe Jeff is going to take that.
Yeah.
Just a quick question, I guess. The December board meeting is the 18th. The cycle is usually the 17th. It's going to be on a Wednesday.
Yeah, we had a long conversation about this issue from a procedural perspective. Our obligation or commitment to HUD is to pass the final plan or vision through this body with a supermajority. And some of the organizations and individuals can act on behalf of their organization without really further ado. Others, particularly the MPOs and the COGs, possibly the representatives of counties, cities, have some form of a procedural process that they have to go through, some fairly elaborate and structured. What we said a year ago, or a year and a half ago, almost two now, that when we laid this out, is we believed it was possible and appropriate to get essentially a final draft approved. I'm using language I would have used in Cleveland at a conceptual level to then go out to those bodies. Say it goes to Eastgate or NEOSCC, which have pretty formal structures for approval. Those have got to go through a committee structure, and I believe, and I've been told very clearly, that those directors are not comfortable or may not be able to vote on behalf of the organization, from the organization taking a formal role. So again, my sense is by December, according to our current schedule, and it's been the schedule we've been on from the beginning, we need a final draft that is suitable for public review by entities that require them, or by internal boards. Say you may, if your directors want to take a look at it before you vote on behalf of the Natural History Museum, that we should afford that time. One of the reasons we've asked for an extension, consistent with our original revised work program when we put in place back in April of 11, was to afford ourselves the time to have those discussions and to make any corrections and modifications, but clearly to think it through as to what does this mean for my organization. Not everybody may be comfortable adopting everything. I don't know at this point. It's a pretty complicated matrix here. So that's where we're headed, and we really want to get to a point where this board would be comfortable saying, yeah, this is as good as it gets. Let's hear, and we've heard from a lot of folks, but we got to put it out into a formal review. It's a little bit. I was listening to the head of EPA on C-SPAN the other day, and that's sort of, they come out with a plan, they put it up for public comment. You learn a lot from the public comment, and then you make your final regs. This process actually started that way, and Grayson, you may remember, they came out with a full-blown draft NOFA, put it out there for comments, and then put a final version out. I hope we've got it right, but I think the bodies that need to approve need to be in a position to do so.
And there's those process issues that different bodies will take different amounts of time and have different processes, but there's also the what that we're approving. And so someone could agree with the findings that we've come up with, some could agree with the recommendations, and then some could take the further step to agree to be active participants in implementing this in the future. Right. We really need everyone to do all three.
Right, and the third piece, and that really segues into Patty's presentation, as we've thought about the ownership, there are recommendations in there that NEOSCC, well, first of all, NEOSCC is essentially a blue ribbon task force at some level. We're studying a problem in great detail and making recommendations. Some of the entities, like, say, NEOSCC, Grace, can take this and use it, and are already starting to use it as part of your long-range planning process. So there will be an actor and an owner of certain data sets and certain recommendations. But that's why we've asked Joe Calabrese to coalesce a caucus of the transit agencies and the other actors in that space, and likewise with the others, so that if there are recommendations in this document that make sense and can be implemented, and they will own it, then we have somebody who's going to implement and carry things forward. The flip side is that there's a lot of heartburn and this makes no sense, and what are you calling for? We can't do that. No one can do that. We ought to know that now. So we're coming forward with things that either someone will own or someone could own going forward beyond us, and that we build a partnership on the implementing side, because we are not implementers, at least not as our current structure permits. And that is what the caucuses, many of the members of whom will have been part of the work streams, that's why we use the same structure, to really try to say, okay, this is lovely, what are you going to do about it? What are we going to do about it? How do we go from strategic thinking to strategic doing, and tee these ideas up in ways that begin to add up to the direction. These are big ideas, they don't take place overnight, but if we have an agreement on the direction, we can start doing the doable.
Yeah, do you have lists of the people that you've invited so far, or certainly can provide that? I've got obviously concern with Medina. We're the only county that had a real big decline in the participation in the other sessions, and I obviously want to make sure that we've got people coming, at least from Medina.
Patty, I would point out, we've had these rather detailed discussions about what this process is and what it's meant to do. Part of it is a ground proofing, particularly on the policies. We're not comfortable that the list of policies is the exclusive or inclusive list. And we also aren't sure that some of the wording is the right way until we talk to the people who are actually in that space. But it gets the other point, Jason, that you talked about earlier, which is what's the follow-on, what's the carry-on. One of the things we've talked about for NEOSC in terms of convening or assembling is to be a convener across the region, and these are basically like the work stream subject matter group. Broadly speaking, the opportunity to bring them together or talk to each other about cross tabs. That's one of the reasons we want all the drawings up on the wall so people can see from one area what's going on in another area pretty much simultaneously. But we ought to be looking at these both in terms of a fact check or a ground truthing for the work we're doing now, and potentially, if it makes sense to the participants and they get value out of it, as a future framework for continued discussion. That's why Patty's come to us with a list of 900 people. That's why we want to get Steve, the Medina County people in the room, because this is where we, I think, build the commitment to implementation, the commitment to collaboration that goes on beyond the life of this grant. And that's why we made a pretty significant adjustment in the engagement process. Initially, we weren't going to have the caucuses, or we're going to do a fairly simple job of it, but we made a decision to devote the engagement budgets to the caucuses, and we are taking a lot of the responsibility as a PMO for the public sessions, because this winds up being extremely important to get the validity of the process. I mean, what are we recommending? But also to build that constituency of implementers going forward. So as you look at the list, we're sending these out. We're going to send them out by county so people can look at. You can look at what's going on in Medina County or Mahoning County. Okay, right. So if one of the things you all can do very much more than we can is look down that list and say, well, in this space, in this place, Anna, if we're going to do something in Mahoning County, X, that person needs to be in there somewhere. I don't see that person. Well, that's the point. Of say, we got to get that person in the tent if we haven't already. We've done a good deal of outreach, but there's always going to be somebody missing, and we need to invite them. The other thing is, this is a one-shot deal for now. How do we handle people who can't make this meeting? What did we talk about?
We're running short of time, so I'm going to keep us moving. If you have any further questions on engagement, please contact either Patty or Jeff or Hunter. Next on the agenda is the future committee report, and we are going to have our consultant strategy design partners present. As you recall, several months ago, we determined that the time was appropriate for us to begin to think about what this organization would look like post HUD grant, and we formed a futures committee. First, I want to thank all of those members of that committee. We have been meeting pretty religiously and have, I think, accomplished quite a bit, and I want to thank the consultants for their work as well. We have committed to presenting the full board with a recommended approach, and our consultant will go into the approach.
comment. And this is basically talking about making a transition from the study and planning phase to an action and implementation phase.
Excellent.
I hope everyone feels a sense of urgency to do this. What we've found is that there are land use patterns in our region that are going to drive us to the poorhouse and affect us negatively in all kinds of ways. These are the fundamental underlying trends that shape all of our work. Whether you're concerned about transportation or the environment or housing or education, all these different economic development, all these issues depend on getting the land use right. So we've got to do this. We can't just step away and say, oh, we did a nice planning study. This is, I think, the most important issue facing our region. It underlies everything. So I hope everyone has that sense of urgency and will continue working on this and build this kind of campaign that will make the changes that we need. It's absolutely essential.
No, I was just going to say, I think that this is a work in progress. I think every meeting we fell back to, are we putting the cart before the horse? We don't know what the vision is. We don't know what the recommendations are going to be, and we're setting up a structure. So I think it's good work. It gives us a foundation to work from. We probably won't look like this, but at least we've thought through a lot of the basics, and it'll help us moving forward.
Great. Thanks.
Any other comments or questions?
Oh, I just want.
Sorry, behind.
Well, I just wanted to say I think it's I'm very encouraged by it. Just wanted to say that.
Thanks.
I just want to say thank you for all the members of the Futures Committee. Grace and I had a discussion some months ago about, so what happens next? And I think it was very clear that we needed to have that discussion well before the time when next hit us in the face. And I think from the point of view of the staff, the idea of this board is thinking about the future, regardless of which one of us may or may not be involved in that future. The reality is we've all put a lot of work into it, as have you, and I think we are very committed to seeing it go to the next level, and whatever it takes on this period of time, David, to start building that compelling case. So the organization does have a future that's defined and supported, and David, I absolutely agree with you that we have discussed this. I went back through all the voices and choices material as part of trying to write the final report. We had this discussion in 2005 and 2006. We've had the discussion for a decade. And I think we've got better information, better tools. We've added a fiscal side to this, so there are actual consequences to our communities by business as usual. We continue to hear, as we did in 2005 and 2006, do things differently, preserve your existing communities, do a plan. That's what came out of that process with 20,000 people. And I think we're moving to the next level, but if we can't go in a smooth function and not a step function, where we get to a point and stop and then get to another point 5 years later and stop, we're not going to get where we need to get to as a region. So I really appreciate the effort that you all have put into this to get us this far. And David, your work to boil down a rather complex set of challenges into something that I think begins to make the case in a saleable manner.
I will echo Mike Lyon's words that I'm encouraged. I know when we first started this, we all knew that we had to think about the future, but I thought we could be in a difficult spot trying to come up with something that was workable, and I'm very impressed that what we have at this point is leading to something that is very, very workable. So again, thank you to all those who worked on the committee. Thank you. Moving along, information items are in your packet. Oh, I'm sorry, I passed up the executive committee update. I don't think there was anything that we haven't covered in this board meeting that was covered in the executive committee except for the citizens forums. Hunter and I split up the two citizens forums. He took one, I took the other. Basically, these were organizations, either Tea Party or otherwise, that were against the work of NEOSCC, gave us an opportunity to speak in front of their groups, and then had question and answer session. I think both sessions were reasonable and respectful. And so moving from there, again, going to the information items, all in your packages, organization also in your packages, other than staffing, which I think the only thing really that we wanted to continue to announce or focus on is that several of the NEOSCC staff are transitioning to NOACA. So we have Kelly Harris, Kelly Britt, and Joe McDonald all coming to NOACA as of October 1st. And Kelly Britt and Joe McDonald will continue to work for NEOSCC on a fee basis. So as they are needed throughout the end of the year, we will loan them and then bill them for their time. And again, recognizing that part of the function of this consortium was to build capacity locally and keep it local, and I think we've done that.
And while we're at it, to backfill and to promote some of the younger staff, Antoine Bowie, who you know has been the essentially the secretary of the board. He will continue in that role. He's also a GIS certified planner who will fill in for some of the work that Grant was doing, and he worked very closely with Kelly Britt and to a lesser degree with Joe, so he will be available to work with them on the product side. Mike Nichols has moved from being an intern to being the assistant for operations and finance, and he will be serving, among other things, as the secretary to the executive committee. So if you get calls from either Antoine or Mike, as opposed to Kelly, starting October 1st, that's who they are and that's what they're calling about.
The other item on here that I don't see either an attachment or a name next to is the HUD grant extension. Is there anything you wanted to mention there?
I mentioned that we submitted a draft to Steve Cerny. He said he's inclined to approve it. He's asked for some additional information, mainly in a form that matches some of their checklists. And I know Lucy intends to talk to you, and you guys you've been otherwise engaged for a while. So our goal is to answer any of his questions. So this week I will be in D.C. briefing Congressman Joyce on October 1st, and Steve and I will have an opportunity, we think, to talk at that point, assuming there's still a federal government on October 1st.
Any old business? New business, Secretary Donovan has a potential visit penciled in on November 12th, so you may want to pencil that in on your calendars as well. And then October watch list, I think you already went through.
Done that, yep.
So I believe, any questions?
Yeah, where is the schedule? We don't have anything finalized yet.
It's very preliminary, just wanted to.
That's why we're penciling it in. We'll know probably the day before.
Evening event on the 12th, or late afternoon.
Any other questions or comments? Do I have a motion to adjourn?
I move.
Second? Joe Calabrese seconds. All in favor?
Aye.